Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Justle podcast. I'm Ernie Raposa, your host, and I'm here with my guest, Jim Willenbring. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Ernie. Glad to be here.
Jim has his own practice as a consultant. He is a strategy and business consultant and is also a leadership and life coach. I thought Jim would be a fantastic addition to this podcast based on everything he brings to the table and what he's been doing out there. So, Jim, would love for you to tell a bit about your story and your journey and what you're doing now and how job seekers can benefit from some of your wisdom here.
Great. No, I'm glad to. And just again, Ernie, it's really good to work with you again. Just for full disclosure for everybody, Ernie and I worked together in one of our last jobs and had a great working relationship, and it's really fun to kind of intersect back again, with you, Ernie. And my middle name is Ernest, and so I do not run into many Ernies around the world, right. And so Ernie and I have another connection that's beyond just our work in the past and our ability to be able to get things done and to be able to work together well. So really glad to be here.
Absolutely.
So what do I do? So from a historical perspective, in my career has been, really in the medical device industry. I worked for Medtronic for actually over 30 years and transitioned from the company in the fall of 2020. So after the pandemic had gotten started and essentially started my own practice, essentially doing, as you said, I do strategy consulting work. I led strategy and business analytics and different businesses related to software within Medtronic for years. And I've been doing that kind of strategy consulting work afterwards as well, which is really trying to help people. What can they do with their data? How can they get more commercial value out of their data? And I'm an electrical engineer by background, have a master's in scientific and technical communication. And so this weird engineer who could communicate and write, not to throw the engineers under the bus.
You were a rare find. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And so most of my career was really actually not deep into the design of technology, but more in that connecting between what are the needs out in the marketplace from customers, from patients and those pieces, and then tying that back, to the organization to develop technology and innovation and services and solutions and such. And so I've got a deep experience in that area. And also a lot of leadership experience as well. And so I led teams for the vast majority of my career, at Medtronic. And one of the really interesting things that I did there that they provided an opportunity for me to do is to actually do leadership coaching. And so back in 2013, the company essentially decided to do coaching staffed internally. And so they identified a group of leaders to actually go through official coaching training. And so I went through the Coactive Training Institute. Essentially, that's one of the very well-known coaching training programs out there, and graduated from that program with a cohort of others, and essentially started coaching and did that from 2014 and of course until 2020. I did go on and there's a further certification that organization provides, which I completed as well. And so I've been coaching, it'll be almost 9 years now, and have really enjoyed it. And so that's part of my practice as well, is in addition to the kind of classic business strategy work, I've got the coaching piece as well. And two areas of coaching. One is I would call it classic leadership coaching, which I had done within the company for years. And so I'm doing that now. And I'm actually a coach for the Bailey Group, which is a local leadership development organization and firm that's here in the Twin Cities. And they've got a broad regional and actually across the US approach as well, and helping do companies, typically mid-sized companies, do leadership development work. And so I'm just getting started to help them out with some leadership coaching as well. And then I've also have a really cool project that I have a twin sister who is a physician, and she's in Erie, Pennsylvania. And so I've been doing a really meaningful project around burnout with healthcare workers. And so we've developed and designed a program that essentially integrates integrated medicine treatment and coaching to essentially address healthcare workers who are really who are burned out and suffering and such. So that's been a great project as well.
Wow. And so timely and important today.
Yes.
With everything going on.
Right. Exactly.
It sounds like you're busier than you were when you worked a 9-to-5 job. You have a few irons in the fire, Jim.
I do. I would say yes and no. On one hand, when you're your own boss, essentially you can set your own agenda, right, and choose to take on the work. And so that's one of the interesting things that I've really had to adapt to is, clearly I was a leader in the organization and I drove a lot within my function and within the business areas that I had responsibility for. But in working for myself, I control that funnel, right? And so part of it is that's one of the big differences, for me is I've been trying to be picky and choosy about the kinds of projects and the kinds of work that I do want to take on, and also think about it from a, am I curious about it? Will I be learning, right? What values am I honoring, right? As I think about the choices and the work that I'm doing, and I acknowledge that's a bit of a privileged kind of position to have, because not everybody's got that opportunity to be able to be picky about the kinds of jobs that they have, but I've had a long career, and I have that opportunity to be able to make some choices about where I spend my time, and so it sounds like I'm busier, but I'm actually trying not to be. I'm actually trying to balance things really carefully as well, and be to make sure that I not just help people with burnout, but I don't experience it myself. Since I've learned a lot about burnout, since I've done this program with my sister. So. Right.
Well, I, for one, have certainly benefited from everything that you bring to the table. You're partially responsible for my getting into the coaching world as well. So having seen you in action, I know that whoever works with you will come away better off from it. So, and for what your transition has been, going from where you were in your day job, your career, to this new second act you have, Jim, the impact you have is you can decide where to add value, where to bring that experience to bear. And let's say the ripple effect you bring is so much more intentional based on where you're choosing to put that effort in. So that must be super rewarding too.
Well, it is, and it's also challenging because it's easy to define impact in some very narrow ways, right? And for example, scale. So in my prior role, I was doing things that were affecting, I would call it, thousands, tens of thousands, even over the career, millions of end customers, right? Patients, for example, who benefited from life-saving devices. And so one of the ways that I found myself thinking was about scale, and what I was used to was having the opportunities in working with a large organization to be able to have impact at that level of scale, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're by yourself, that's a lot more difficult, right? To be able to do that. And so for me, I've actually had to go through a redefinition of how do I define impact, right? Okay. And what is, and scale is one way of doing that, but scale in that case is breadth, right? Versus depth. Right. And that's one of the ways that I've really had to redefine it in my mind, because it's really hard for me to have that kind of scale. Of course, nowadays just by myself. However, but that ability to be able to go deep, the ability to be able to be present, right, and the ability to redefine. It's not just the output of what kind of impact on revenue and on customers and all those kinds of things, but it's that and it's also around, I would say, the quality of the interactions that I have with people and how am I showing up myself to those. That's not just the doing piece, but it's also the being piece of it as well. And so I've learned a little bit about that and about mindfulness and other kinds of things as part of through my coaching kind of experience, but especially through some of the integrative medicine elements that I've gotten familiar with my sister and her practice partner as well has been really, really, really helpful, to be able to understand what that balance is and be able to map that out.
Wow. Well, that just sounds amazing. And I feel even more lucky to have you here on the podcast. And we talked a bit about some of the themes we wanted to cover in advance, because this is a podcast that is dedicated to building a community where folks who are potentially in transition, looking for their next thing, looking for ideas of how to accelerate their journey to that next step. We want to provide them with tools, resources, let's say something to put in their backpack when they leave this podcast. So we had talked a bit about some of the coaching you've done for folks who might be in transition and where they might have challenges with living in that period of uncertainty around just living with fear and vulnerability and having to put yourself out there where those feelings are new and uncomfortable, but we have to move forward through them. So is that something you can share a little bit more around?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that theme of what is your relationship with fear and vulnerability, right? I think is a strong one that I've been grappling with myself, and then also kind of working with, the coaching clients that I have as well. And so if we step back a little bit, and I think about what are some of the challenges that a number of the kind of clients that I've worked with and myself have faced over time, I think there are some themes that come out of that, related to, for example, some assumptions. You don't have to stay, in your specific job or career until it burns you out, right? Until the stress gets so high that it causes physical, psychological, emotional issues or problems, right? And so sometimes I'm seeing folks that are on they've gone through that, they've hung with it. Loyalty is a value. It's one of mine, right? And so there's an element, I think, that's especially a big challenge in high purpose organizations or professions where those expectations for the company, the organization, or the customers, right, are so high. Think healthcare, for example, right? And then you combine that with, I would candidly say, sometimes poor leadership, combined with all the high pressure and the high purpose. And that can be a recipe for an organization to really take advantage of their people to the detriment of that employee's kind of health and well-being, right? And so part of the work that I've done with a lot of people is to really unwrap that a bit, but also, that prioritization, right? That care and compassion that they have for others, for their colleagues, for their, for the patients or the customers or the organization, they are as deserving of that kind of self-compassion and self-care as others are, right? And oftentimes it's a one-way street for many people, or it's 90% one way and 10% the other way, right? And I think that everybody is really worth the respect, and they deserve to actually take care of themselves, right? Physically, mentally, and emotionally, because you're a human being. Okay, not because of what you produce, the output of what you produce, your job title, all that kind of thing. But it's none of that. It's really, you deserve it because you're a person, right? That, and so I think I've run into a number of folks that have served others their whole career and really struggle with focusing on how might they serve themselves, right, in their decisions and actually in drawing boundaries, so. Yeah.
And when you, in some of my own coaching sessions, when you let's say ask that provocative question around, let's just stop and think about you, the client, for a moment, and put all that other stuff aside. It's you see that struggle happening in their eyes around that just being a strange feeling for them to live in that space.
And that invitation, I would say, is to be vulnerable with themselves, actually, not just to be vulnerable with others, but with themselves, And so I think that holding that mirror up and saying all those values that you honor by all the work and the effort that you do with others, how are you valuing, how are you applying those values to yourself, And values are a really powerful thing that I use in my coaching a lot. And there's lots of different ways to determine values. And there's, you can go, I'm sure there's a bunch of websites you can go to and other kinds of assessment places. And so I do a lot of values work, in that, these are not values around honesty, integrity. I mean, those are values. Great. Those are helpful to have, right? But these are things that are actually uniquely and meaningfully, defined for that individual person. Right. And the definition of fulfillment is, are you living in ways that honor your values, right? Fundamentally. And and so I think that's, so I think when I think about tools or approaches, for people who are in transition, how well do you know yourself, right? How well do you know your values? And
that could take you from one bad job to another bad job if you are pursuing, whether it's a journey or a narrative or a title or money, and at the end of the day that isn't what fulfills you or fills your tank. That initial high of, I have a job, fades fairly quickly when whether it's the culture or the work doesn't, let's say, spark joy, right?
Yes. And the opposite would be it steps on your values.
Right.
And you can't avoid a little bit of that. I mean, that's always going to happen, right? But does your organization step on your values, right? Is there a misalignment of that piece of it? And if you haven't named that for yourself, you're actually going to have an emotional reaction to it. You're going to have an emotional reaction when your values are stepped on, and you're going to have an emotional reaction when your values are honored, right? But you may not. You might think, "Hey, I'm feeling really good right now." Well, why is that? Well, understanding that, and also I'm feeling really bad right now. I'm really feeling put down. I'm really feeling left out. I'm those pieces. And so that self-knowledge, that awareness is really, really powerful for people. And so I think whether you can do that with assessments, whether you work with a coach like yourself, Ernie, or myself, or that piece of it to really pull those threads out and really understand that at a meaningful level, that is really powerful. And, I worked with a coach when I transitioned, from my last job. And that was really, really helpful. It's like physician heal thyself, physicians getting treated by others. I mean, it's physician heal thyself. It's hard to do that, right? And just like, so in working with that coach, it was really a journey of self-discovery for me where I am now versus, all these files I had in my head, in my heart about kind of where I was in the past and those expectations and all that kind of thing, where I needed to let a lot of that go, right? And really build things back up to kind of where what was going to be in best in service to me based on who I was right now and what was going to be helpful for me going forward and such. So So part of that, I think that whole journey, Ernie, I think is really about, when you think about vulnerability and fear, that's embedded, in putting yourself out there for yourself, right? And taking risks, around being able to make decisions and making risks that are going to be making decisions around jobs or careers or things that you want to do in your life that are actually going to honor those values, right? And if you haven't been doing that for a while, that's going to feel very different. It's going to feel uncomfortable. And to me, that kind of awareness of that is really critical because growth comes from being uncomfortable, right? That's essentially the characteristics of it and the definition of it and such.
Yep. It creates new muscles. Yep.
Right, exactly.
And even from a practical perspective, people tend to go to interviews with a lens of, well, I need to get this job. I need to jump through these hoops. I need to pass these tests. Right. You should also have your antenna up for the culture at that early stage and look at those resources that are out there like Glassdoor and other folks that can give you a sense of what it's like what it's like in a day-to-day, from a day-to-day perspective. And when you're talking to those recruiters, when you're in that interview round, ask those questions. Ask, is there camaraderie? Do people have best friends at work? Is there a sense of humor? These are, and I'm projecting a little bit, right? But these are things that are important to me, and folks that are on a similar journey should be thinking about those things before they commit to the next thing. Yeah.
Well, it's that you as a candidate interviewing the company, right? In addition to the company interviewing you or the organization interviewing you. And it's, and what are those, I would call it, culture kind of value oriented questions that you can ask, that can be what I would call high gain questions, right? That you can ask that would really surface, is this going to be a great fit for me? And so, but you got to do the work before that to understand what's important to you, right? And what's going to honor those things. And so that's almost, when you think about all the time that people put in interview preps and resumes and all that kind of thing, how much time do they have an understanding to know what are the criteria that I'm going to judge this job for that's actually more of a cultural and a value fit versus here's what my income requirements are, here's what I'd like to be able to do in the job, right? It's how do I want to be in the job? How do I want to be with others? And how do I want them to be with me? So it might come up with some really creative questions that the hiring manager may not have heard before, right? But I think it's the kind of thing that's really helpful.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention as well about this kind of being vulnerable is one of the things that I did, I had clearly a huge network, kind of having worked for a company for so long internally. One of the things that was really hard for me was losing that, or, losing that day-to-day interaction with colleagues like yourself, Ernie, when you and I work together, right? And when you're working for yourself, right? How do you create that, right? And how do you develop that? And part of that is I had a former colleague I worked with, her sister-in-law, was, a senior director at a big, a large organization based in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I was as well. She was transitioning to be a consultant, and a coach at the same time. She said, "Hey, you two should talk." So we did, and we meet every 3 weeks or so. We've been meeting since last fall. It's kind of what I would call a community of practice. And we pick podcasts, we pick books. And then we've actually more recently been actually relying on each other to give feedback around different projects that we're working on, right? And so it's almost turned into almost colleagues, right? And somebody that we trust, and it is exhausting to think of everybody as competition, right? And I think that element is how do you make and find your own team, right? In whatever those organizations are. And let's say you're going from one company or one organization to another one, right? You still need to develop that network, within those organizations, and what is it about how you want to relate to other people, and how do you want to be with others and how you want them to be with you, that's going to be in service to really finding a fit and a match, and I think, and those questions really require you to be vulnerable, right? In asking those, right? And being willing to say, hey, would you be willing, to work with me on this, right? Or to connect with me on a regular basis so that we help and support each other, right? I mean, that's a vulnerable question to put yourself out there and risk that on the professional side of things, right?
Even where Dan, my co-founder, and I are on the Justle journey, we both have day jobs. We're just a couple of guys looking for a way to give back and help one another. And it's a great way to stay in touch with people we like and admire and like having conversations like this with. So, but initially when we started putting ourselves out there, we're like, wow, this is very much outside of our comfort zone, but it's something we feel passionate about. But we had to take that. It was a bit of a leap of faith to say, hey, we're doing this. And people started coming out of the woodwork, and we have pretty expansive networks already. But we found more and more people that were out there like us that just wanted to help somehow. So it's amazing what you'll find if you just take that first step and let people know what you're all about. That community can coalesce around you pretty quickly. Yeah.
Right. And the fear of raising your hand, putting your neck out, right, is really strong, isn't it? Yeah. And I think so that element is what is your relationship to fear and vulnerability, I think is really, and one of the things I learned over my long career is when I started feeling uncomfortable, there's different kinds of discomfort, right? But there was a certain kind of discomfort for me that was telling me, this is a stretch for me. Okay. This is me learning. And this is me getting outside of my comfort zone by definition, right? That piece of it, I'm being uncomfortable. And part of that is what's the opportunity to actually lean forward into it as opposed to step back, right? That element of it. And so being able to understand yourself and going on some of that self-reflective journey whether it's through yourself, through readings, through working with a coach, that kind of thing is really, really critical. So.
Well, speaking of reading, Jim, you and
Yes.
without unbeknownst to one another, we're reading a new book that was out around the same time called Strength to Strength. And it touches on this a bit around, let's say, the kind of the learning period of your life and the life of when you're more of an aggregator, you're putting different things together from your collected experiences. And before I get too into the weeds on that, what's your kind of high level takeaway from that book? And I guess we should credit the author on that too. I know.
Yes. Yeah. Arthur Brooks. So he does a lot of work with the Atlantic, and he's I'm not sure what his PhD is in, but he ran a consulting firm for many years and essentially went on this personal journey himself. And essentially, he tells a story. The trigger for this book in the beginning, I think, was really interesting, where he was on a flight with somebody and he sat next to someone who was very famous, in his life and in his achievements. And this gentleman was essentially feeling like his life was a failure, right? That piece of it. And I
think the quote was, "I wish I was dead." And this guy was sitting behind him. He didn't know who he was initially, right? So he just heard this person who was just, I guess, commiserating with his wife, and she was trying to make him feel better, and he was just like, "Oh, my life is over. I wish I was dead." And so he wasn't expecting this person to be this famous person when the plane landed, right?
Dumbfounded, right? And so. So part of it is, I think, the kind of the tenet for him is that there's two kinds of, well, chapter one, just if you read the book, is brutal. Okay, I mean,
it absolutely, it's a gut punch. Yeah,
right. It is, and I think that's the title. I wrote the title down. It's "Your Professional Decline is Coming Much Sooner Than You Think." Right? So the first couple chapters essentially lays out the case for why is this happening, kind of neuroscience, cognitive function, all this kind of stuff. But it boils it down. There's two different types of intelligence, right? There's this fluid intelligence, which is really that ability to solve abstract problems, right? It's kind of raw smarts. And guess what? You got more of that when you're young, right? And that starts to essentially fade after your 30s, right? 40s, 50s, et cetera, right? But then you talk about this crystallized intelligence, which is really knowledge that's gained, right, through life, through acculturation and learning. And you think of that as wisdom, right? And of course, wisdom, people are wise as they've lived and through experiences and such over time. And so you can imagine that crystallized intelligence, it increases, right, over your lifetime, and increases until, it starts to drop, of course, when you're towards the end of your lifetime and such. But what his tenet is take advantage of the curves, recognize, embrace them, understand that those curves are happening. And the concept is that use your wisdom, get off of the fluid intelligence curve and the striving, right? There's this striver's curse, right? Which says, I have to be as successful or more successful than other people in this whole competitively kind of fueled environment, and it turns into a treadmill, right?
Well, and they talk about it being almost like a drug, like the dopamine effect you get after an achievement, and you're constantly chasing, or you can fall into that habit of being on that treadmill, constantly chasing that high of trying to find that again. And they use the example of, I think it was Charles Darwin who wrote his Evolution of the Species, or his big claim to fame. He was 50. And he spent the rest of his life trying to top that, when that was his thing. And so he never acknowledged that, rested on his laurels, appreciated it. He just kept striving. So,
and then the opposite example that they brought in the book was it Bach? It wasn't Beethoven.
I think
it was Bach, I think, where he did a lot of his best composing early on. But then he shifted into that kind of wise teacher mode, right? And essentially completely revamped, the value that he added to classical music in ways that were astounding, but was leveraging really, the wisdom and the knowledge that he had generated over decades, and created a legacy for himself, right? As opposed to trying to rest on the laurels that essentially, got him to where he initially was recognized in that piece of it. And so, I mean, it goes back to the theme earlier around vulnerability, right? And about fear there's a hell of a lot of fear in being able to jump from one to the other. And I'm still getting my arms around it, right, a little bit as well. I think my consulting work, which is a lot of what I did in most of my career, it was a little bit more on the fluid intelligence side of things, right?
Sure.
And the coaching work, right, is a little bit more on the crystallized intelligence side of things, right? And so I still have a foot, on that side of it, but I would call it the striver's curse, right? That you have to get more and more and more. I use that metaphor of a treadmill is what kind of progress are you making, right? Versus being on the treadmill and just being spun at it, and actually being on a treadmill and not having the ability to stop it or to slow it down or be able to control it is kind of the evil treadmill, I would call it, and such. So I just think that's an element in that book around that I think is really helpful to get your arms around, is that there is a natural kind of shifting that's happening in your head, in your mind. And I think acknowledging that, defining what that means to you, and then taking advantage of it, right? And shifting to how that goes. So, yeah. I think myself, I kind of backed into it. When I was approached to say, "Hey, do you want to be a coach?" And it's like, "Oh, I've been a mentor. I've been a leader. I manage people. This coaching thing is it's probably very similar to mentoring, I bet, right?" So, wow, it's kind of like a small piece of it, right? But then there's a whole nother piece to it as well, and that incredibly got me outside of my comfort zone.
As a consultant, you're used to telling people, here's what you need to do. I've solved your problem, right? Where coaching is so much not that, right? You're running alongside that person, but you're not giving them, you're not telling them what to do. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But the interesting thing is, is how that has affected the consulting that I do, right? And so clearly I can deliver a recommendation and that piece of it, but when you actually, if you're working on a team and on a project, you're facilitating a group, related to that work, those coaching skills are more and more valuable, right? Because this whole fundamental tenet, which says an idea someone else comes up with, they're going to be much more motivated to pursue that than something you deliver up with them on a silver platter, that piece of it, right? And so that element and so combining those two has been kind of an interesting journey for me. It's right. How do I meld my coaching and my consulting work together in ways that are really fun for me, right? That honor both pieces of it.
And you can still bring the wisdom you've accumulated to the table without necessarily needing to know everything. And the whole thing about coaching is being curious and being okay with not knowing, right? That's actually makes you a better coach. And it reminded me of another nugget from the book. And this is something I think folks who are in transition could really benefit from, is embrace for our more seasoned folks in transition is embrace that a bit, where it's I'd say the power in we've heard all the studies that the more diverse a team is, the let's say the higher performing that organization is, right? And the author talks about how he was giving a talk at a Silicon Valley firm where everybody's in their 20s, and one of the attendees asked a question about diversity and how can we get more diversity in our organization, and he was chatting about it, and he said, "Well, where are all your old people?" And and the person said, "Oh, you mean people over 30?" Right? And he said, "What a punk," right? But having those folks embedded in your organization there's the folks who have that, let's say that perspective of we've tried that before, it'll never work. But there's also the folks who are like, we've tried that before, here's what we saw, and here's what you should be thinking about before we go repeating mistakes. And that is bringing that wisdom to the table, and an organization should be hunting for those people. And I know ageism is out there, it's a thing, but if you're a recruiter or you're a job seeker, understand the power of some of your folks that are farther along in their employment journey, right?
Right. Yeah. The other thing I picked up, from Brooks was in this book was trying things, that whole element around trying different things out. Right. And that was one of the things that I did and are still doing, in my career is right now. And in my role is, what are some ways for me to put my toe or foot or leg in the water? Right. For example, like I haven't done a lot of work with nonprofits. Right. But this friend of mine, from a long time ago, president of the board of directors, for this theater company, this youth-oriented theater organization. And I was reconnecting, and he asked me, hey, you want to help out? And so it's some pro bono work that I've been doing, related to this organization. And part of it was, hey, I've never worked with nonprofits before, right? I've always been on the for-profit, company, in healthcare, all that kind of thing. And this is in theater, so all of a sudden it's like, oh, that sounds really different. And all of a sudden I was kind of feeling in myself, I'm a little nervous about this, right? And so all of a sudden it's this element about vulnerability and about fear. And it's just like, okay, let's give it a try, and how can I try this out, right? How can I put my foot in the water and leg in the water? And it's been a great experience to be able to kind of get some visibility to that world, be able to take the skills and knowledge that I have and to adapt it, right? And not kill them with, with all of the kind of approach and the structure when they're a small organization that you have the luxury of in a larger organization. And how do you tailor that? So the lessons that I've been learning on it has been really, really, really good.
Right. And you can distill out the key things that they really need.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. A piece of it. So I think that's an element of it. And, I think the other theme in here, which is a theme you and I were talking about here, is, and what you and I are doing right now is do you have a learning partner? Who can help you in your learning journey, right? Arthur Brooks essentially went to India. He was essentially, almost a spiritual journey as part of some of the chapters towards the end of the book, right? But part of it is what are you learning, and how are you doing that? How are you actually learning? And do you have like-minded other individuals or non-like-minded ones who can help you think differently, right? That would really challenge and really help you kind of pull out the threads of the experiences that you're going through to help you learn from those things, right? So you're not sentenced to repeat the same mistakes again and again, right? That piece of it. And so just so that, just your question around, and just the comment I made about the lessons that I'm learning from working with this nonprofit, I don't know if I've shared those with anybody right now, right? And so just the fact of you and I talking about this on this podcast, not go to the meta level here, but do you have thought partners? Do you have opportunities for you to be able to process out loud on a podcast, or, over a cup of coffee, right? Or to whomever else, with a coach, that piece of it, to be able to actually accelerate your learning. And then the next question is so what are you going to do about it? Right. Do you want to do more of that going forward? Do you want to do less of that going forward? Do you want to keep experimenting related to that piece of it? But this whole journey around the learning piece of it, right, and the reflection, purposeful reflection is what I call it. Is often a key skill. Not only clearly to learn about your projects and what worked well and worked differently, but actually about yourself and what's your reaction to those pieces also.
Yeah. And some of the self-assessments that are out there are alarmingly accurate, and I've taken a bunch of them over the years, and I like to think I'm special and unique, and no test can pin me down or put me in a box, but it certainly helps me understand where there are areas of myself I can focus on, and pulls out some uncomfortable things that I might not necessarily notice if I hadn't gone out and intentionally taken that assessment or put out that 360 survey or gone to that networking event where there might be a bunch of people I don't know or would want to sit next to at a bar and have a drink with, but I'm in this networking event with them and we're talking about stuff. So definitely getting outside of your own, whether it's your echo chamber of your own head or your immediate bubble of friends. That's really important to get that fresh perspective, and to keep your I'd say just to keep yourself a bit grounded in what's happening out in the world, and to get a little more meta on top of what you had, Jim, is just what resonates out there, and what lights you up and what lights other people up. Yeah.
Right. Can I share one of my favorite kind of assessments?
Sure.
Yes. So there's a Gretchen Rubin. She's an author on habits. And so Gretchen Rubin. Yes, Gretchen Rubin. And she's written a number of books around habits and behavior. And one of my favorites is it's called The Four Tendencies. And it's all about how do you respond to expectations, both external expectations, from others, or internal expectations from yourself. And like any assessment, right? You fall into four categories, right? There's four different categories, right? This framework has been really, really helpful, both for myself, but especially for the clients that I use, because it's kind of how you're wired, and you're not cemented into these different categories, but generally you're essentially oriented, one way or the other across these different four. And the four are, okay, and she, of course, has got great names for them. Hopefully I can think of them off the top of my head here, right? So you've got the obliger, okay, which is somebody who responds to external expectations, but not to internal ones. So they oblige others, but they have a harder time if they set their own, for example, expectations for them, New Year's resolutions, right? They have a hard time following through with those. But if someone tells them what to do, or someone gives them something to do, then they respond to it, right? There's the upholder, who says, give me an expectation or I will set one myself. I will uphold them all. Okay. I'm a master at expectations, right? Then you got the questioner, who says, an external expectation, I need to question that, right? I have to turn it to an internal one for me to be able to respond to it, right? And then the last one is the rebel, who essentially rejects all expectations, both external ones from others and then internal ones themselves, right? And so none of these are bad or good. It's just how people are wired in certain ways. And this is, when I think about it, it's often at the crux of, especially people who are so oriented to other people. I think the biggest category is obligers, in the world. There's the most people run into that category. And so when others give you an expectation and you prioritize that over something that would be more helpful for yourself, and you keep doing that again and again and again, guess what that is a recipe for, right?
Yeah. And then there's not much of you left, right?
Right, exactly. And she has a term called the obliger rebellion, because that finally builds up and up and up, and then right, it explodes, and goes from there. And so I love that framework. It's helpful, it's useful. You don't get locked into ones, but if you understand yourself, then actually you can put hacks in place for your own behavior. Yeah. You can start to say, hey, if I'm an obliger and I want to exercise on a regular basis, right, because I want to be more healthy, then I'm going to engage an accountability partner. And if I know a friend of mine is waiting on the corner at 6:30 in the morning, I'm going to get my butt out of bed. But if I have to be the one, if I'm just going to exercise by myself, I'm going to have a harder time doing that, right? And so you know yourself, you can be able to then can design what you want to accomplish, and then leverage kind of your behavioral tendencies, right? To be able to take advantage of that, that piece of it. And all four of those can do it, right?
And that can work in how you build a team, how you build a relationship with your boss, with your family, right?
Exactly.
I mean, even in this example, I love recording these podcasts and talking to people I love, and editing the podcast, not my favorite thing. Right? So I need my co-founder to be my accountability partner, to be like, hey, when are we editing those podcasts?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's and I think knowing yourself, and people around you get it. If you're pretty upfront about your strengths and weaknesses, and that you're putting that out there, that you need them to help you, people are generally pretty accommodating there. Yeah. In my case, they may mock you, but if it's among friends, it's fine.
Right.
So Jim, we're coming up on time here. I'm so excited about your being able to join us here. Would love to have you back. I feel like we have hours and hours of content with books and assessments and experiences we could share here. So would love to have you back. I won't put you on the spot on the podcast, but just so you know, you have an open invitation. Any parting thoughts, pearls of wisdom you want to leave folks who may have tuned in here to learn a bit about the journey, and any takeaways here?
A couple. One would be, when you're in transition is not the time to hunker down. It's actually the time to take risks, right? And that fear and vulnerability piece of it, you're going to feel it. It's natural. It's human nature. And the element of getting familiar with it and understanding when is a fear something you really need to listen to and act a certain way, of course, for safety and health and all those kinds of things. And when is that fear around discomfort around learning, right? And discomfort around growing. And if you can tell a difference between those two over time, that is an enormous recipe for accelerating growth and actually leaning into opportunities that you just don't know are going to have some of the best kind of benefits and payouts over time. So I think that element of it is understanding your relationship, right, to fear and vulnerability, I think is really critical for just for knowing yourself, and then how do you want to respond to some of those new opportunities in front of you. And so, because otherwise you're operating with blinders, right? They say, sometimes people shut down, it's around logic and thinking, right? But emotions, that's where your motivation comes from, fundamentally. And some people say, check your emotions at the door. Well, if you do that, you're half there, right? Yep. You're leaving, the emotions are the piece that bring the kind of the spice, and the motivation and the juice, right, to how you interact with others. And so getting to understand how you're wired related to that side of yourself is a journey that you'll never finish, but delivers so many benefits over time that the journey, and there's no destination. It's the journey is the value in and of itself. So just
love it. Yeah. Well, Jim, we have one last question for you. It's a bit of a silly question. It's in my contract. I have to ask you this. If you were on a desert island and you have an option here, is it a favorite book or a famous person that you would want with you on that desert island? And you can't pick people that have access to helicopters and stuff. People have already tried that. So,
I would, in middle school, I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And that is the series that I've probably gone back. I haven't gone back to it in a little while, but I know that's more than one book, but I would say it's a series. And so you can probably find one book that has all of the 3 books in it, sure. But that one I go back to. I just think about the hero's journey and just all of the elements that go into that. And I would take that one, because that would transport me back to my kind of childhood. And there's probably so many lessons actually to pull out of it, even as an adult as well. And so that's what I would go back to.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks again for joining us, Jim. And thanks to everyone who joined the podcast. I hope folks learned a thing or two today, and that you'll join us next time. I'm Ernie Raposa. Jim Willenbring was my guest. Thank you.
Thank you.